Silicon Valley in the 1970s wasn't a tech empire. It was a dusty frontier of wild ideas and raw ambition. In this chaotic scene, two pairs of teenagers were quietly building the future. Bill Gates and Paul Allen were obsessed with software. They saw a future where computers ran on code they would write. So they created BASIC for the Altair 8800, one of the first personal computers. Meanwhile, in a Los Altos garage, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were assembling the Apple I by hand. Their machine wasn't just functional. It was personal, beautiful, and ahead of its time. Gates believed in software for everyone. Jobs believed in total control from hardware to interface. Their philosophies clashed early, but both were chasing the same dream: to put a computer in every home. What started as passion projects from two garages quickly became the foundations of empires. Apple and Microsoft weren't just building tech. They were building identities, and a rivalry was born that would shape the digital age for decades to come. By the early 1980s, the personal computer was no longer a hobbyist dream. It was becoming mainstream. IBM entered the market in 1981 with a machine that would define the business world. And for the operating system, they turned to a small company called Microsoft. MS-DOS was basic but powerful, and Gates licensed it broadly. This decision made Microsoft the invisible engine behind nearly every PC sold. Meanwhile, Apple struck with style. In 1984, the Macintosh arrived in dramatic fashion, with a commercial that portrayed IBM as Big Brother. Jobs unveiled the Mac with pride. It had a mouse, a graphical interface, and unmatched user experience. While Apple focused on design and vertical control, Microsoft built an ecosystem by licensing to everyone. This open approach flooded the market with Windows-powered machines. Microsoft was becoming ubiquitous, Apple selective and sleek. The rivalry intensified. Each company saw the other as a threat to its vision. The battle wasn't just for market share. It was a fight over what the future of personal computing should look like. The 1990s belonged to Microsoft. With the launch of Windows 95, the company became a global powerhouse. People lined up at midnight, and Microsoft software was running on over 90% of computers worldwide. Gates had turned his startup into a tech empire, dominating homes, offices, and schools. In contrast, Apple was struggling. After Jobs was ousted in 1985, the company lost focus. They released confusing products like the Newton and spread resources too thin. Innovation stalled, leadership faltered, and Apple's market share plummeted. Microsoft was growing stronger each year, financially, culturally, and strategically. Gates appeared on magazine covers and TV, heralded as the king of the digital age. Apple, once seen as a visionary force, looked lost. The press predicted its demise. Investors were fleeing. It seemed like the rivalry was over. Microsoft had won. But under the surface, something was stirring. Apple was about to get a second win from an unlikely but familiar source. The story wasn't over. In fact, the most dramatic chapter was just beginning to unfold. In 1997, Apple was weeks away from bankruptcy. Sales were down, morale was low, and its identity was shattered. Then, in a dramatic twist, Steve Jobs returned. His comeback wasn't smooth. He had to cut deep. Projects were canceled, divisions dissolved. He focused Apple on just a few core products. But the biggest shock? A $150 million investment from Microsoft. At a keynote, Gates appeared on a giant screen, announcing the partnership. The crowd was stunned. But Jobs wasn't saving Apple by surrender. He was rebooting it. He launched the Think Different campaign, reminding the world what Apple stood for: creativity, rebellion, boldness. With intense focus, he reshaped the company's culture and sparked a renaissance. The iMac was the first sign of life: colorful, playful, powerful. Under Jobs, Apple rediscovered its soul. The rivalry with Microsoft wasn't dead. It was evolving. Apple would no longer compete on Microsoft's terms. It would create its own universe, one designed for users who thought differently. And soon, that universe would expand in ways no one imagined. Apple's comeback turned into domination. First came the iMac, then the iPod. Music was now sleek, portable, and cool. With iTunes, Apple redefined digital media. But in 2007, they shattered expectations. Steve Jobs walked on stage and introduced the iPhone. It wasn't just a phone. It was a pocket-sized computer with a touchscreen interface and internet access. The crowd was floored. Apple had leapfrogged an entire industry. Microsoft tried to keep up with the Zune, a clunky music player, and Windows Mobile, an outdated phone OS. Neither stood a chance. Apple now owned the conversation. With each iPhone release, the world stopped and watched. Apps transformed everything, from how we navigate to how we date. The smartphone age had begun, and Apple was leading. Microsoft was late to adapt, caught between legacy systems and missed opportunities. The rivalry had flipped. Apple was no longer the underdog. It was now the force setting the pace. The battle had shifted from desktops to palms, and the tech world would never be the same again. After Jobs' passing in 2011, many wondered if Apple would lose its spark. But under Tim Cook, Apple didn't slow down, it scaled up. Cook turned Apple into a global logistics and design machine. The iPhone became their anchor. New products like the Apple Watch and AirPods deepened their ecosystem. At the same time, Microsoft was undergoing its own transformation. Satya Nadella became CEO in 2014 and pivoted the company away from old rivalries. He pushed cloud computing, launching Microsoft Azure to massive success. Office moved to the cloud. Windows became less of a centerpiece, and the Surface line showed Microsoft could do premium hardware too. Instead of head-to-head clashes, the two companies began to overlap. Many users now worked on Windows laptops while using iPhones. Each embraced their strengths. Both companies hit trillion-dollar valuations. The rivalry wasn't dead, it had matured. Less about war, more about influence. Apple and Microsoft were now shaping the digital world not through conflict, but through evolution, innovation, and scale. Today, the legacy of Apple versus Microsoft isn't just about who won. It's about how both changed the world. Their rivalry pushed the limits of innovation, redefined industries, and introduced billions to personal computing. Jobs brought emotion to machines. Gates brought them everywhere, from clunky desktops to cloud-powered ecosystems. Their competition fueled creativity and forced evolution. The iPhone revolutionized communication. Microsoft reimagined productivity. Their products now coexist in ways unthinkable decades ago. You might write a report in Word on your Mac or sync files between iCloud and OneDrive. This isn't defeat, it's convergence. Gates and Jobs once stood on opposite sides of a digital war. But over time, their visions combined to build the world we live in now. Behind every tap, swipe, and click is a legacy born from this rivalry. And while the battles have changed, the spirit of competition remains alive. Because in the end, Apple and Microsoft didn't just make tech, they made history. And their story continues, one innovation at a time. If you love this story, hit like, share it, and subscribe to Timeless Legend for more untold tech rivalries.